My name is Glyn Moody. I'm a tech journalist and I've had the pleasure and privilege of writing about computers and digital technology almost ever since they've existed in the kind of modern sense. So I started out with an Apple II computer running the first spreadsheet VisiCalc, which was my introduction to the world of microcomputers. After that, as a journalist, I wrote about the dozens of small microcomputers that no one has ever heard of now, but which were the kind of early days of computing, and then moved into the world of PC computers, the IBM PC, starting things off, creating a kind of ecosystem. But the really big change, I think, for computing, and certainly for me, was when I discovered the internet, which was in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Because when you start connecting computers together, it radically changes things, obviously, as we now know, but at the time it was pretty much a surprising revelation. And one of the interesting things about the internet is that once you've been on it for even a short time, back in the 1980s and 90s, you came across this thing called free software. Because it turned out that the culture of the internet and the culture of free software, or what later came to be known as open source, were deeply intertwined. And this became one of the main focuses of what I wrote about, such that in 1996 I went to visit Linus Torvalds, who wrote Linux, in his Helsinki flat, and I wrote a long feature about my visit and about Linux for Wired magazine, which appeared in 1997, and that was pretty much the first full-length exploration of this world. What was interesting was that nobody thought it was important at that point, apart from the people working there. If you talk to people in the computing world, they really dismissed it if they'd heard of it. I talked to Microsoft and they were very dismissive of Linux at the time, and they really didn't think it would catch on. They were wrong, obviously. As we now know, open source basically runs the entire internet. It runs most of the computing world, so we have Linux running all of the top 500 supercomputers. It runs on 80% of the smartphones in the world at the basis of Android. It is used for the Internet of Things, so the only place where it isn't really used is on the desktop, and even there it's beginning to be used more. So what's been exciting for me to track is how this almost unknown, impossible idea of collaborative development on a global scale actually has won. It's taken over the entire computing industry to the extent that people assume that software will be written like that. I mean, it is now the default option. But in many ways, for me, equally exciting is the way its fundamental ideas of collaboration, particularly open collaboration, have been embraced in many other areas. One of the first to do that, and probably the most famous outside open source, is Wikipedia, which is an open collaborative effort to write the world's greatest encyclopedia. But it's gone beyond that. It's now things like open access, where you have a kind of collaborative working together of knowledge and academics. You have open data, whereby you're sharing the raw data with other people for the purposes of them working on it and producing things that you could never have done on your own. Together that forms things like open science, where you actually have the entire scientific process is opened right up. Things like open government, perhaps a bit more resistance there, but still the idea that we should be able to see into government and that government should work with us and other governments in a collaborative sense. So for me, having started from this world of isolated, weak computers to see this global network of very powerful systems joined together by open source software and using the open collaborative method in all kinds of domains has been a tremendous journey, and it's one for which I'm very grateful.